So now let's talk about virtual environments and the venv module in Python. Now it's important to understand when we're talking about virtual environments, this has nothing to do with VirtualBox or Hyper-V or Type 1 or Type 2 hypervisors. Virtual environments in Python is not that. We use the word virtual a lot in the technology world, in the IT world, mainly to talk about essentially siloing systems, right? So when you have a virtual machine or a VPS, a virtual private server, that is an instance of a server that resides in a file, and so basically it's siloed off from itself and its entire operating system it's siloed off from itself within that virtual environment. You may have heard of vhosts. So if you deal with the Apache web server, you can actually host multiple different websites on one web server, and it has vhost, a vhost file, and basically that will point the visitor to whatever folder contains the website information for whatever website that they're trying to go to. So the vhost file silos these different websites so that the users can go to the appropriate one. So it is important to understand when we talk about things like virtual environments in the IT world, it's one of those things where it can get a little bit confusing because the same word is used in many different instances. So when we're talking about Python, what we're talking about is we're basically creating an environment with all of the modules that we need for whatever project that we're creating. So normally, right, when you have your computer and you're running Python on it and you use pip to install modules, that's going to install the modules for the entire computer. So any script that is running on that computer will be able to gain access to those modules. One of the issues that you run into, though, is when you start building applications or whatever it is, your projects that you're going to be deploying them somewhere, is one of the issues is on your computer you might literally have 200 modules installed, but for this particular project you only need like 3 of those modules. And so one of the questions is how can you kind of compartmentalize the modules that you need for this project away from the modules that you need for other projects, and that's where you're going to use venv. Basically it's going to create a little folder structure for you. Within that folder structure will be the modules that you install, and then your project will have access to those modules, and you can basically ship all of that off as one zip file or whatever to whoever is actually going to be deploying the project. The other useful thing with venv is Python really depends on a lot of open source projects, right? So you go and you take a look at all the open source projects out there to do whatever it is that you need to do. One of the problems with open source projects is sometimes between versions, things break. Right? And so you may have one project that needs version 2 of a Python module, and you may have another project that needs version 3 of a Python module, right? This script works well on this version, and this script works well on this version. But the problem is, right, if they're using the exact same module on your system, then whenever you upgrade or downgrade the module, that's going to be the one module that they access. The cool part about venv is you can create a virtual environment, you can install version 2 into this virtual environment, you can install version 3 into this virtual environment, and then when you're running the script, basically the script that needs version 2 can run here, the script that needs version 3 can run here, and everything works pretty easily. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about virtual environments. Basically, we're siloing off, we're creating a container for the modules and the environment our Python script is going to use so that we can then move that around and also make sure it's siloed off from other things on the operating system so there aren't any additional problems. Now let's take a moment to talk about Silicon Dojo and my bias for teaching you and the real world, because surprisingly those are two very different things. So we are not going to use virtual environments a lot in our classes here in Silicon Dojo because it adds an extra layer of complications when I'm trying to teach you how to do things. And again, for Silicon Dojo, I try to keep everything as simple as possible, so we focus on one topic and then you learn that topic and then you feel comfortable comfortable with that topic and you move on, right? The more levels of complication, the more likelihood there is that something is going to break and then something will fail, and then all of a sudden you're doing a whole massive amount of troubleshooting that has nothing to do with the class that I'm trying to teach you. So for the most part in our projects, we're not going to be using virtual environments, because for our projects we don't need to use multiple versions of the same module. We are not shipping the product off to anybody or that type of thing. So just realize when we're doing a lot of these classes that virtual environments are a good thing. We're just not going to use them a lot, again, because of that extra level of complication. What I will tell you though is in the real world, when you start deploying things, you will find many times that you will need to use virtual environments. Either you'll actually be forced to use virtual environments, or simply all the documentation only pertains to if you have a virtual environment. I found this out with DigitalOcean. I was trying to put up a little project of mine just to see how it would work on the actual internet. And one of the interesting things with DigitalOcean is they have just a tremendous number of white papers. They are awesome for their documentation for when you're trying to deploy something, but all of their documentation for deploying things with Python within their VPSs is all about virtual environments. They have all the documentation for if your app is supposed to use a virtual environment and no documentation for if it's not. So that ended up being an additional day of troubleshooting for me, literally trying to get my simple app to work within their environment. So that's one of the things. Again, if you're going to be going to DigitalOcean or anything like that, just realize you don't have to use virtual environments, but you kind of may be forced to simply because that's the only documentation that they have. The other thing is if you're using like the Raspberry Pis, their current OS or other types of environments, you might run into problems where it will not allow you to install the modules directly into the global directory for Python. Basically, it will require that you use venv, and so that is one of those things just to keep in mind too. So we, by and large, will not use virtual environments, but there are some circumstances that you essentially will be forced to use them, even if you don't want to. Now, installing venv is very simple. It's basically just another module. So you use Python 3 -m pip install virtual env, and that will install venv for you on most systems. If you're using an Ubuntu box, you may have to do sudo apt install. So this will actually install for the entire operating system Python 3 -venv, and that will install venv virtual environments for your system. So one of these should work. Again, with many things in the technology world, try them and see what works for you. So now let's talk about creating and using a virtual environment with venv. Now the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a folder where all the files for your project will reside, right? So you're going to create this project, a web app, a tkinter app, whatever else, basically create one folder. Everything's going to go into that folder. You're then going to use the command prompt terminal to get into that folder. So you'd have to know how to do file navigation, right, to get there. And then once you get there, you're going to be able to create your venv folder. So basically what's going to happen is you're going to run the create command. And then when you do that, it will create a folder for your virtual environment with some file structure under there, a bin folder, some other things. And basically what that folder is going to contain is all of the modules that you're going to be using for your project. So in order to do this, basically what you do is from the command line, while you're in the folder you created for your project, Python 3 -m venv, so that's the module that we're calling, and then whatever you want the name of the venv folder to be, right? So if you want it to have a special name, that's what you put in there. Now what you'll notice is kind of like the standard everybody agrees on so they don't lose their mind is simply to call that folder venv. So it's Python 3 -m venv for the name of the folder. And the reason that you do that is, imagine again, if you have a relatively complicated project, If you use different names for the venv folder for all the different projects that you're going to do, that is going to be a headache when you go to maintain that particular project. If you always call the venv folder venv, then no matter what project you're in, you know where the hell that folder is, right? That's going to be one of the important things. Then what's going to happen, so you're in the terminal, right, normal terminal, then what you're going to do is you're going to activate the virtual environment. So you do source, while you're in the terminal, source, whatever that folder name is, so venv/bin/activate, and what that's going to do is that's going to activate your virtual environment, and when you do, you're going to see this venv prompt, and that is going to tell you you are now within the virtual environment. Once you're within the virtual environment, you can use pip to install packages like you normally would, so you can install beautiful soup and bottle and all those kinds of things. You can list the packages that are installed within that environment, that type of deal. And then if you want to deactivate, basically get out of the virtual environment, simply use the command deactivate, and that will drop you out of the virtual environment. So here we are at VS Code, and I simply open a terminal prompt within VS Code so we can see how these virtual environments work. So if I want to create a virtual environment here, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to go here. I will do Python 3 -m venv, right? So that's calling the venv module, and then I'm simply going to call this venv so I don't lose my mind when I'm trying to maintain this in the future. So this is the command. This is where we call the module, and this is whatever we're going to be calling the folder. I have my file structure open here, so when I hit this, you can see enter, and we can see that venv was created. I don't know how well you can see this on your screen, but there's bin, there's include, there's lib, and there's a config file here. So all of that has been created when we create this virtual environment. Now that we've created the virtual environment, we need to activate it. So basically all you do is you do that command source space then venv. So this is the name of the folder. It's the name of the folder. We're not calling the module. /bin/activate. We hit enter, and then you will see here that we are now within this virtual environment. So when this prompt changes, this shows you that you're in the proper virtual environment. Once we're here, we can do something such as like pip list to show what modules are installed in this virtual environment. And as we can see, the only module installed within this particular virtual environment is pip. So if we want to install a module, let's say we do pip install OpenAI. So we want this to be an AI project that we're creating. I can then do this. It's collecting all of that information. It's downloading it. It's installing it. I can now do pip list again. And now we can see that we have OpenAI and a few other things that are now installed along with the OpenAI module. And so this is what is installed now within this particular virtual environment. And so I can use these for whatever projects that I'm creating. Then if we want to drop out of the virtual environment, let's say we want to go into a different virtual environment, or we just want out of it entirely, all we're going to do is we're going to simply use the command deactivate. So it's not exit, it's not buy, it's not any of that stuff, it's deactivate. You do deactivate, you will now see that your prompt has changed, and so you're now back to the standard OS command line. So one of the really cool things you can use with venv is being able to create a requirements file and then actually be able to install modules based off of a requirements file. So what this means is you can create your own little virtual environment, basically install all of the modules that you need, and then once you know what modules you need for your project, you can run this command pip freeze, and what pip freeze will do is it'll take a list of all those modules and the versions of the modules that you're using, and it will save it to a requirements file. So this can be named whatever you want. The standard is just requirements.txt, but this will basically contain all of the modules and the versions that are installed. You can then basically go into a different virtual environment, run the pip command again with install space -r, and then the name of the requirements file. It will read the requirements file, and then it will install all of those modules within that new virtual environment. So here we are back at VS Code, back at our terminal prompt, and we are within the virtual environment. So I installed the bottle module. I also installed the Ollama module along with the OpenEye module that we did before, basically with the idea of let's say we're creating some kind of AI-based web app. So if I do pip list here, and hit enter, basically we're going to see that OpenAI is installed, Ollama is installed, and Bottle is installed. So let's say we want this environment to be saved to a requirements.txt file. What we can then do is we do pip freeze. So the command is freeze. So pip freeze. Then we say where we want that information to be stored. We say requirements.txt. So pip freeze to the name of requirements.txt. We hit enter, and basically now you can see up here there's a requirements.txt file. If I close the terminal out, you can then see within this txt file is basically all of the modules that we have and what versions they are. So to show you how to install using a requirements.txt file, let's create a new virtual environment, activate it, and then install all of the new modules. So basically what we're going to do is, again, we are here at the command prompt. Notice there's no venv or anything before this. This is just a normal command prompt. So we're going to do Python 3 space -m venv for virtual environment, and then the new name. So new venv. So that's going to be the name of the new virtual environment. We're going to hit enter. And then if you can see it up here, we've created this new folder. Then what we're going to do here is we're going to say source new venv bin activate. And now, as you can see here by the prompt, we're in new underscore venv. So this is going to tell us what virtual environment we're in. We can then do pip list here. And then when we do pip list, basically we get the same thing that we got before, where only pip is in there. So now to install all the modules from the requirements.txt file, as we can see, we are in the new virtual environment. That's important. So what we're going to do is pip install space -r and then requirements.txt. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. So this is just word wrap, so it just goes around, don't worry about that. Then we're going to go here, and we're going to hit enter. It's collecting all of the information. It is then going to download it. If we then do pip list now, we can see that we have OpenAI now installed within this virtual environment. We have Ollama installed within this virtual environment, and we have Bottle installed within this virtual environment. So that's how we can use basically the requirements.txt file to transfer all the information about the modules that are being used within one virtual environment so that all of those modules can be very easily installed in a different one. So that's a basic overview of what virtual environments are and what the venv module does within the world of Python. There are other modules that are able to create virtual environments, but generally we're going to deal with venv just because that's the default standard. It is a module that comes with the core Python components when you install Python onto your system. Again, you do not have to use venv. Again, for many of our projects, we simply are not going to because it does add an extra level of complication when you're trying to build projects, especially as a new person. But you do need to learn venv because depending on your environment, either you'll be forced to use venv by the environment, or again, with companies like DigitalOcean, they simply only create white papers that explain how to do things with virtual environments. Ergo, at the end of the day, it's a hell of a lot less stressful to go with the flow and use a virtual environment. So that's the basic idea of what virtual environments are, and it's one of those things, if you just use it a few times, it may seem a little complicated now, but it's actually pretty easy.